artifact can be given to somebody else. Maybe Amit, have it and share with your screen.
I think we can just proceed, and I'll send the artifacts to you, Amit,
Yep, makes sense. No worries.
and then we'll post them on the group because I don't think it's not very. Let's not keep the people waiting.
Yeah, sure. I think we are on. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So yes, today we're going to talk about architectural abstraction and how thinking abstractly and learning how to think abstractly about these kinds of concepts related to the design of a solution will help you become a better architect, whether or not you are an architect today or aspiring to become one. And well, what exactly does an architect do? They plan the solutions that we implement, and that they themselves implement or somebody else implements. But altogether, the bottom line is that they're the people who design the solutions on which are supposed to fulfill the requirements that we get from various sources, the business, the users, etc. And today we're going to talk about the various points and ways of thinking so that you can then architect better solutions and not come up with solutions that don't meet the requirements or are somehow missing something, and these kinds of frameworks of thinking. So the first thing is, like, what makes an architect different from a developer? And what I would say the biggest difference is that an architect, if we think about the analogy of building a house, an architect is the actual architect who plans the house and how it gets built, and the various tools that we will use to build every part of the house. Whereas a developer is somebody actually who is going to build the house. An architect doesn't therefore need to be an expert in knowing, for example, how to use a particular tool. They just need to be aware of its existence and say that for, let's say, building this part of the house, we're going to use this tool. Whereas a developer is somebody who is experienced in using that tool and knows exactly what to do with it. So we're going to keep this analogy in mind when we think about how to work as an architect. And if we think about in the Salesforce world, the difference between a developer and architect in this way, an architect doesn't necessarily have to know in depth about how to write Apex code or how to configure a flow. An architect just needs to be aware of what are the features of Apex coding or flows that can be used to meet a particular requirement. So an architect, while somebody's title can be a technical architect, that doesn't mean that whatever they're doing is very technical in nature necessarily. It just means that they're looking at the problem from a more technical angle, perhaps, than somebody who would be like a functional architect or another type of architect by title. But altogether, there's a lot of similarity regardless of what type of architect you are whenever you're working as an architect. So what exactly does an architect then, what does it mean to design a solution based on the requirements? And what are the parts of that process that we have to go through? Well, first of all, in order to get any solution in place, we have to understand what those requirements are. That's the first step. Then that second step is understanding what are the constraints for us to build that solution. And the third step is to, okay, then actually plan out how to build that solution. So it's this type of three-step process that I generally use when designing my solutions. And this is also something that is very helpful if you're practicing for the CTA to think about the problems in this way. Understand the requirements, understand the constraints that you're working under, and only then start planning your solution. Don't jump from, once you hear a requirement immediately to the solution, because then your solution might be suboptimal. So, okay, what does it mean to understand the requirements? So the requirements is basically, a requirement is some need that must be met by the system. And or not necessarily even by the system, but usually by a business process. So for example, that can mean that the business must be able to sell these services to customers. That is a requirement. That's a very high level requirement, but it's a requirement. And another requirement might be that we must be able to invoice whatever we've sold to the customers so that we can have our cash flow. And that's another requirement. It's again another high level requirement, but that's a requirement. What is generally what I find when working with business stakeholders is that they don't tell me the requirement necessarily. They tell me what they want to have done and implemented. So they might already have a solution in mind that they're thinking of. So there's a difference in what exactly is needed, which is the requirement, and what the business wants, which is sometimes not a requirement. In fact, most of the times it's not a requirement, but rather a solution. So an example of this is, for example, when I worked on a project for a client, and we were taking down their order fulfillment process from Salesforce. And we were moving that to an external system because that was better suited for that process than Salesforce. But they had a requirement that sales needs to be able to report on the order data, which no longer would reside in Salesforce. And our product owner was saying that, yeah, we need to import all of these orders and order line items to Salesforce just for the sake of reporting. Now, if this is a small client, small situation, this is probably fine. Let's go with it. But in this case, that's not necessarily a good approach. So when the business comes to you and says, we need orders and order line items in Salesforce, that's not a requirement. That's a solution. That's a solution to their problem of having to be able to report on the orders that are in the fulfillment stage. That's a requirement. That's not a solution, because the reporting doesn't necessarily have to happen in Salesforce. And being able to grasp this concept of what exactly is the requirement and getting to the details of why the business is asking for what they're asking is crucial. You can think of it like a doctor-patient relationship as well. So if you go to the doctor and say, I want some antibiotics, give me some antibiotics, is the doctor's job to first of all make sure that will antibiotics even be helpful for you? Before actually prescribing anything for you. And the same way as architects, it's our job to make sure that the solutions that we propose will actually help the business and not, and even if they might help the business, will not have some serious side effects which might be felt later on. The same way as in this doctor-patient relationship. So learning how to understand requirements is key, and understand the needs. And the way that you do that, there's a few key things that you can do to do that. Number one is ask a lot of questions. So when the business is saying something, when the stakeholder is saying something, ask questions about it, because that will give you an understanding of what they're actually looking for. And don't yet make any assumptions about how you might be solving that and what a potential solution is when you're asking those questions. Be very open-minded at that stage, because you don't, if you start approaching it from a certain angle and from a certain frame of mind that this is the solution that we're going to implement. So for example, in this example where if we need to be able to sell products to customers, we're like, yeah, we're going to just do opportunities and opportunity products, and that'll take care of the requirement. We don't yet know, based on the information presented to us, that that is actually in fact the case. So if we start approaching it from that angle, we might start forcing a solution that's built on top of opportunities and opportunity products, rather than actually understanding what does the requirement mean and getting down to the details. And then our solution will become suboptimal because it's now been forced upon this preconceived idea of what the business wanted, rather than us actually having understood before we went into the process of making the solution. The next thing to do is challenge the business. So we want to understand what they're doing and ask questions. The other thing we want to do is make sure that the business, they have to go through the thought process of, okay, why do I want this particular thing? To make sure that they understand it themselves. Because they might come to you with this kind of preconceived idea of what it is that we need to implement for them. And in that situation, it's our job to also help them figure out how they can solve their problem, and that there might be better alternatives. Because if we start asking them questions as architects around, okay, tell me around a bit about why you want these orders in Salesforce. Okay, you want to report on them. Do you have anything else that you need to do in Salesforce regarding these orders? Are you sure that Salesforce is the place where you want to run these reports? Asking these kinds of questions from the business will also make them think around, like, okay, yeah, maybe I don't need this after all. And then it'll further on down the line make it a lot easier for you to propose a solution to them and them to be on board with your proposed solution. So it's also a bit of stakeholder management in that regard. Yeah. Finally, I think something or another important aspect for this type of overall of what an architect needs to do is to understand the big picture of how the solution fits in. And this needs to happen from multiple perspectives. So the first thing is that whatever solution we build, it has to fulfill the requirements set for it. And whether or not sorry? Was there a question?
No, Irvani.
Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them at this point. Or just at any point, and then we'll have a Q&A time a little bit in the end.
Yeah.
Okay, but yes, I see there's a lot of messages in the chat.
Yeah, but there is no question. There's just the messages.
Okay, yes. Yeah, but we have to understand from multiple perspectives when we build that solution, or when we design that solution. And this goes into understanding, again, some other potentially hidden requirements for the solution. So, for example, some other requirements for the solution, that there might be some non-functional requirements of the solution, that we have to use certain patterns, architectural patterns in the solution. And I guess this is more of one of those constraints on our solution. So for example, if we need to integrate with a system and that system does not support event-based integration, then that's a constraint in that our solution has to be planned without the use of this type of event-based integration with the other system. It has to, that's a constraint we must then adhere to. Then there might be constraints set forth by governance models. So for example, there might be a governance model in place that we have to build our APIs in a certain generic way, which we have to then adhere to when we do design APIs for whatever solution that we're making. And these are sort of guidelines that we need to take into account when planning the solution. Then other things to keep in mind is that we're not solving for just the here and now as architects. We're also we need to make sure that we're solving for tomorrow's requirements as well. So what does that mean? That means that when we're building a solution or designing a solution, we have to make sure that the solution can meet future business requirements easily. It doesn't have to meet them right now, but that it can be changed to meet them easily if there are some requirements that we're anticipating. So for example, if it's down the line, the company wants to change their strategy a bit and to focus on a different and change the way that their business runs. For example, right now they're selling let's say they're manufacturing some sort of large physical products or machinery, and for the time being they're selling it to their customers directly, but down the line they want to make it more of a lease agreement and to lease out the machinery. Then that will have significant impacts to what kind of system you have to build and the requirements around that. So if we know this when we're designing the system, then we should keep in mind that, okay, we will need to cater to these requirements in the future. And that could mean several things. That can mean either that we will build something very quick because we'll be changing our business model down the line and we don't need to worry about long-term maintenance of this system. And that way we can reduce the cost of building whatever we're building now. Or it might mean that we build something which can be molded flexibly into the new requirements later on down the line. And we have to make that assessment on a sort of case-by-case basis of what makes sense, and then propose accordingly and make the decision then of which approach is the best. Then furthermore, we have to understand the user perspective. So it's not just sufficient to understand the business perspective of what the business is asking, but we have to understand what's the user perspective on things and how exactly the user is meant to interact at various points with the solution that we're designing. Because we might build a system, like for example, if there's a requirement that a user must be able to select from a list a postal code, well, then we can implement a solution where we just give a list of all the postal codes and the user will have to scroll down and we'll show them render 10 postal codes at a time, and there might be 20,000 in the list that the user has to select from. Not a very good way of doing it. So we have to make sure that we keep the user in mind and that whatever we're designing is something that the user can actually use in a reliable way. So keeping these kinds of perspectives in mind, rather than just technically that, okay, I'm going to need to do some automation, and because I need to do automation, I'm going to use this tool to do it. We have to think more holistically around what it is that we're exactly trying to accomplish. What are the business requirements that we're trying to meet? What are the constraints around that? So, for example, these kinds of technical constraints of what technologies we have at our disposal, as well as these kinds of other constraints of what is the user experience going to be like And then, of course, we come to the budget constraints as well. We have to keep those in account as well. We can't, no matter how much we'd like, we can't make this solutions overly complicated. And then finally, we have to make sure that we anticipate future changes of the system. And that's why, as an architect, while I a lot of the time, it helps to just understand what strategy the company is taking and where they want to pivot their business when planning out their solutions. Yes, there's a question.
Yes, Ravi, go ahead.
Thanks. Yes, Hermione, I had a question. Am I audible? Please let me know if I'm clear.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So here my question was that in your use case, while you were doing this order in, fulfillment, so what like how was the inventory management being done? Like was it totally used on Salesforce platform, or was it some kind of integration between some legacy inventory system and communicating with Salesforce? Like how was it done? If you share a
So
little
actually,
bit.
there was no inventory management system per se, because it was about orders for services.
Okay. Okay, so maybe this could be considered as a platform as a services, or maybe software as a services. No.
No, it was a telco.
Okay. 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 So ideally,
Yeah.
in that case, the inventory details need not be upgraded every while and then. No.
No, but that wasn't necessarily the concern there, because like we were moving the whole order fulfillment off to a separate platform just so that we could automate it more, and it was a platform meant for the actual fulfillment of orders within the telco industry. So it was a lot more suited for that than the Salesforce order management which they had at the moment.
So like how if, like initially prior to Salesforce order management, I mean prior to Salesforce platform, they must be using some legacy system to have those order confirmed, right?
No, they were using Salesforce for order fulfillment. But then, of course, the actual, like, if we think about actually provisioning the services into the mobile network, for example, that yes, there's a separate system for that. But for the management of order fulfillment, Salesforce was the system for that.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. And then thinking about these kinds of technical constraints, we also have things in mind which, if you study for the CTA, are very relevant in that. For example, the large data volumes or the other aspects around that. Because if we start, say, the Salesforce platform, while it is a great platform in many respects, it doesn't handle very large data volumes well. And in those situations, we have to for those situations, there are certain mitigations that we have to take and consider. And if we're moving data off platform, then that does bring a lot more complexity in the form of integrations. So a project that some of my colleagues worked on, where we had a bit of an issue, is where these kinds of calculations for how much we anticipate data to be saved on the platform were not made in advance. And what happened is, well, when you start building junction objects of junction objects in the system, you end up having quickly like many records that, well, eat up the storage capacity that you have inside Salesforce. And that caused issues in that project. So just thinking about these kinds of things is key. And following whatever the Salesforce CTA syllabus has is a quite good checklist for going through there to make sure that whatever you're building is scalable in many aspects, such as this one, and making sure that it's fitting of the requirements. So there's a question. Are there any actual tools/mechanisms we can use to make sure that an architectural solution is not specific to a current need, but can easily cater for other future requirements? So that's a very good question. And there's specific tools and mechanisms that we have for this kind. So the biggest way I would say to be able to do this is to understand with the client when you are and with the business when you're having the first meetings of an implementation project, is go over with the client what is their strategy, what kind of decisions have they made regarding their business for the future years, and what kind of changes they're anticipating to their business in those future years. And that will already tell you, like, okay, in the future we plan to pivot our business in this direction. And then you know, okay, yes, that's the direction the business is going. And then you can start thinking from inside, okay, what does that mean for this solution? And then when you're thinking and designing different solution options, you can consider these kinds of strategic decisions that the company has made, that, okay, if we implement something in one way, we can do it very quickly, it'll be easy, but if we implement it another way, it'll take a bit more time, but then it'll be a lot quicker for us to implement changes that are in line with what the company has strategized with, for example, their new business models or new product lines, new services, etc. And these requirements don't mean necessarily that the business is changing itself, but it could mean something, for example, that the company plans to grow through acquisition. And if the company is planning to grow through acquisition, then we need to cater to that in our IT systems as well. And we need to think about, okay, if the company wants to acquire other companies, do they want to integrate those companies operationally together? Or do they want to just have them in their own IT infrastructure and own processes? And if it's the latter, then we don't have a problem. We can just do basically whatever we want in Salesforce. But if it's the former, then we have to think about, okay, is the Salesforce solution that we're building now, is it specific to this company? And how easily can we onboard other companies onto this specific solution from the same industry as a result of these acquisitions? And this also ties into when we're making decisions of, for example, how many Salesforce orgs we're going to have. So previously, I worked with a client that had 3 different business units, and they had 3 different Salesforce orgs, one for each business unit, because simply those different business units could functionally be different companies. And they even though they had some of the same customers, some of the same products even, they wanted to keep the autonomy between those business units for the sake of being able to spin off one of them as its own separate company if they find a suitable buyer. Yeah, so exactly, it's critical for the business to have a view of their future needs and growth plans then, and they might not have it, and they might not have that view, but that's why to kick off the project, the implementation project, it might make sense to actually invest some time together with the business to try to understand what their future view is and what they want in the future. Because that way we can also be proactive from the IT perspective in making sure that our IT solutions are in line with what the business is wanting. Yeah, exactly. It would be something like discovery sessions, but I guess it would be sort of a lot more high level. And just, yeah. Good. But yes, just in general, the profession of an architect is very holistic. We have to take a look at the whole picture, the big picture, all the way from the very top level strategy of the company and the organization that we're working with. But also, sometimes we need to be able to talk to developers and other stakeholders about nitty-gritty details. And that's the point of an architect. Like, we're the middleman who understands also the business users, but the technical people as well, and it's our job to connect them together. So if you the most important things, if you want to become a better architect, uh, or if you're aspiring to become an architect, is to start thinking like this holistically about, okay, if and thinking about, first of all, when you're faced with a requirement, think about what is the actual requirement here, and how do I get to the actual requirement, and try challenging the business or whoever gives you that requirement. Second of all, then you can um, ask a lot of questions and make sure that you have a thorough understanding of the requirement. And in understanding the constraints that are relevant for the situation, these are technical constraints, and then these are also the constraints of budget, time, etc., and understanding how those are made. And then understanding how your solution fits the overall strategy of the company, not only now, but also down the line in the future. So start thinking about, how does your Salesforce solution fit into the big picture? And that concludes my presentation. So we can have Q&A now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Armani. I think this is really a useful session. A lot of points to take a note of. And thank you for joining. And then again, everyone, if you have any questions, uh, please feel free to ask. I can see there is a question in the chat, which is how to enhance a system which is pre-built and needs to account merger acquisition of new companies which has different key processes, but the data structure is similar to the existing one.
Okay, you have asked a very interesting question, and I would love to go into depth about this one. But the short answer is it depends, and the long answer is it depends exactly how the key processes are different. And then the question is, has there been a decision on, will the processes be unified together, or will the processes be separate and the way that they are right now? And depending on the answer to this question, you will take a different approach likely. Because if they have decided to unify the processes as well, then it's a question of, okay, how do we unify the processes, and are there any changes that we have to make in the system to accommodate to that? But if they have decided to keep the processes separate, then the question becomes, okay, now that the processes are separate, what kind of what does that require from our system? And sometimes it's easier to change the process than it is to change the system. And that's why it might be, or before making that decision, it's usually a good idea to understand how drastic changes are required from the system. I don't know if you want to elaborate a bit about what is the exact situation, and maybe I can give you more a better answer with more
So
context.
yeah, yeah. So basically, like there is a specific use case that I would like to discuss here. So we have existing system which is following a process, and it has um, some of its process defined, and means like it's like the acquisition is more of kind of a way where there are two different actual companies. The new one is having a slightly better process, but the thing is they don't have the first company, the pre-built system does not have anything called inventory management or anything like that. It's just the standard sales process where they just maintain the opportunities and how much is closed, won or lost. And the second one, the new company is like having lots of different things at their end, and they have more than just the opportunities, inventory management and all, and lot of key things are different. Rather, this one does not have those kind of things. So uh, like we really don't have any idea of like if it will be unified or not. But the thing is The idea is to align both the processes slowly and gradually, not at the same time, like completely merging them into the latest means existing unified existing process, but rather upscale the existing system to match the good parts of the existing company, and also align the processes that are there of the new coming company as per the existing company policies.
To do it gradually. Okay, so
Mhm.
but has there been a decision made of which company will one company be onboarded to another company's platform, or are these decisions still pending?
No, that is made like the new company will be onboarded to the existing company's platform. Since like
And it was the new
yeah,
company had the a bigger like already more functionality in their existing system, right?
yeah, and that was outside of Salesforce. So like they are moving towards Salesforce now. Like they have to be onboarded on Salesforce.
Yeah. Okay. I got it. So then we get it's not just a technical question in this case, but it's also a question of do they have like a change management question?
Mm-hmm.
Because while this type of gradual development and agile development is very good when we're developing something new,
Mm-hmm.
it's not very good when we have to replace something that exists already. Because replacing something that exists already with something of lesser functionality is usually not taken well by the by the users and by the business. And
Nope.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so we have to have at least a realistic roadmap of when the features will get there uh, that they need and that they use. So my question then to so to answer your question is what I would do is I would come up with a roadmap
Mm-hmm.
of how do we onboard them to this new infrastructure, to the existing Salesforce system, and what exactly are the requirements that they need to have implemented solutions for, so that they can be
Okay.
onboarded to this new infrastructure. And that might mean that some further development needs to take place, and
Mm-hmm.
that also means that some sort of stakeholder battle needs to take place between because I presume that
Both
they
the
want to
system. Yeah.
integrate as soon as possible, or the
Yeah.
management of the acquiring company would want the integration to happen as soon as possible, but the
Mm-hmm.
management of the acquired company doesn't want to lose out on the features and on
Yeah.
their ways that they see as being efficient at the moment. So getting these
Exactly.
stakeholders into one room and to talk with each other and agree on a way of going forward would be key here.
Okay. Got you. Thanks for the answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So Himanshu, you have a question.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Hi, Hamani. Actually, I have one question. So, in addition to what Jheel asked, right? Like, if any system has been, pre-built and it has been built for 2 years, now certain requirements come from the business, and like business want to get it implemented in a particular way, and as an architect we know that it is not the right way to do it, right? So how do you do that kind of stakeholder management basically, and how do you convince the business basically that this is not the right way? And sometimes the businesses want that we want the application feature as soon as possible, but as an architect you know that it needs a proper design, a proper thought process needs to be there, right? So how do you convince business in that front?
So it the answer is that it depends on what exactly they need to be convinced of. So a lot of the time, if the is there some sort of issue that you're having with convincing the business in particular, or have you yet to have this conversation altogether?
uh, Actually it so what happens is like that there are people who talks to the client directly, and they have committed something to the client, right? Now they don't really understand how the system should work, and they have their own biases because they are coming from the legacy application, Java based applications, right? And they have built it in 2 years, the system with the same mentality, right? So it's more like the system is not extensible at all, and the requirements that came from the business, right, is very like it's not very holistic requirement that came earlier, right? They gave the requirements in bits and pieces in such a way that now the system is not neither extensible nor scalable, and the kind of,
Ah, I see.
yeah.
Yeah, so the current system which they've implemented is not scalable because the requirements were given in bits and pieces and
Yeah.
implemented.
So one day they thought that we should use probably Omni Studio and Experience Cloud, right? But how the Omni Studio and Experience Cloud would really help them, because Omni Studio is not very much very scalable, or we can't do much in the Omni scripts and all, right? So I mean they didn't think from that perspective, and now they want a good system to be delivered to the client, right? But which is quite difficult at this point. So basic, so basically, like the question is that like I mean the kind of foundations that we have to lay out, right? It should be in the very beginning, right? And as you said, that whatever the business requirement is, and and we need to understand what their future prospects are and what they think about the future of the business. Then only the foundation should be laid out for the system, right?
I think we have lost Harmani.
Sorry, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we
Yeah.
Yeah.
can hear you now.
So I think we have to think. So you have to understand the requirements in their entirety.
Yeah.
So not only the future state requirements, but also the current state requirements you have to understand in their entirety.
Okay.
Yeah, and then in their entirety, not at the detail level, but at least on the level that you know that, okay, these requirements should be solved together because they had the solution to them is contains dependencies, um, so that you can then understand that you're not solving just one requirement at a time, but can solve the requirements when they do come towards you. And
Okay.
I've heard the business argue against this, saying that this is not agile. I would argue that not doing this is not agile. And this is something that we have to do in order to actually be able to develop in an agile way. But the good thing is that the business nowadays doesn't advocate so much for agile. They advocate for it's no longer that much of a buzzword as it was like maybe 4 years ago or 5 years ago.
Sure. And Harmani, one more question. So, as an architect, should we also, uh, uh, creating the class diagrams or entity relationships and all for the developers to work on, or it is something that developers or tech leads can manage at their side?
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So yeah, the answer is it depends, and it depends on whether or not your developers and the other people that you're working with need those artifacts to understand what exactly that it is. Entity relationship models I tend to find. Hello, do you hear me?
Yes. Now it was like breaking.
Yeah, the entity relationship models I tend to find very useful to explain the overall data models. But again, you don't have to draw them for everything, just for the necessary parts.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Himanshu, for asking your question. There is one more question in the chat, I think, which says developers are generally known for their reserved personalities. At least that's true for me. I think this is the question from Siavonga. I have noticed that good architects are good communicators. Is there any way we can grow into the good communicator personality?
Okay, so this is a good question. This is about what kind of personalities are suited for architects, and I have to say here that the different personalities have different strengths, and the part about being a good communicator, there's different levels of becoming a good communicator, and I guess the most important aspect in communication when being an architect is, does your audience understand what you're trying to say? And that doesn't necessarily require you to be reserved or not reserved as a personality, but what's more important is understanding what is the perspective of your audience that you're talking with. So if it's the business users, then you need to use language applicable to them and explain it in a way that they can understand it. And if it's developers, then you use a bit of a different language and just understanding your audience. And I think this is a skill that you can develop regardless of what type of personality you have. And it just requires practice. Do we have more questions?
So,
And
yeah,
when it's a mixed audience, oh yeah, when it's a mixed audience, so it depends on what the message it is that you're trying to deliver to a mixed audience. Because I would say rarely do you, if you're trying to deliver the same message to a mixed audience, then you should deliver it to them in a way that they can all understand it. So, for example, if that's explaining how a solution works, then you would have to include both the business perspective in the forms of maybe UI diagrams, process flow charts, etc. And then for the developers in the form of integration payloads, JSON structures, etc.
yep. Thanks,
Okay.
Armani. I think we don't have any questions. So, again,
Amit, hi. There's one more question I think we missed from Gagandeep Verma. I think it's a good one. I had a similar one. Thank you.
oh, yeah.
So how
Thanks.
should an architect analyze the current state of a Salesforce org? And it depends what perspective we're analyzing it from. So I've done a few org audits myself, and usually those are actually done from the perspective of, does the org actually meet the business requirements and how well? And can the org be developed on top of further? So listing out what are the Apex classes in the org, things like that isn't necessarily helpful, but understanding it from the perspective of what part of the system is doing what is helpful. And understanding it from the perspective of how easy is it to change the existing solution is key here. So you might take a look at the Apex code and look at, okay, how have our Apex classes been written? If there's several classes with thousands of lines of code, maybe not necessarily the best practice, and might be very difficult to change things without introducing new bugs and making the system more complicated. and just adding more complexity to it. And what I would do in this case is whenever the business then asks for a new feature to be developed, is I would advocate for then refactoring the existing logic related to that feature at the same time, because the business doesn't want anything developed and any refactoring unless it brings direct business value. And I actually have to go very soon, like in a minute. So we'll take the last question.
I don't see any question, and I don't see anyone having their hand raised. So again, I think in the last minute, I would say thank you, Armani, so much for taking time out and sharing the insights with us, and these were really helpful. And thanks everyone for joining us and being a wonderful audience.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Thank you, everyone.
good luck to all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
thank
Armani.
you.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.